The red lipstick on the collar wasn't meant for me to find. Neither was the unfamiliar cologne lingering on our bedsheets. But the credit card statement with charges from the Velvet Room on nights Maggie claimed to be at her sister's. That was the nail in the coffin. My name is Walter Grayson. Most folks around Pinecrest just call me Walt or Sheriff. I've worn this badge for 32 years in the same town where I was born and raised. At 68, I figured life had already thrown its hardest punches my way. I was wrong. I sat at my kitchen table, holding that damning piece of paper. 3 consecutive Thursdays, same place, same time. Maggie wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Just getting sloppy. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, my father's clock. 3 generations of Graysons had lived under this roof. Now their spirits were witnesses to this betrayal. The phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. I let it ring twice before picking up. Sheriff Grayson. Walt, it's Edith Perkins. Got something you might want to hear. Edith had been cleaning houses around Pinecrest since before I became sheriff. Nothing happened in this town without her knowing about it. I wasn't in the mood for gossip, but something in her voice made me listen. I'm dealing with something right now, Edith. It's about Maggie and that nightclub fella from Cedar Ridge. My hand tightened around the receiver. Go on. Been cleaning at the Lake Conway summer houses. Number 12. Owners from out of town. Barely uses it. She paused. But someone's been using it plenty. Found Maggie's earring there yesterday. The turquoise ones you got her for Christmas. The earrings I'd saved 3 months to buy? My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. You sure it was hers? Got her initials engraved on the back. MG, unless you know another MG with expensive taste in jewelry who's friendly with Victor Blackwood. The name hit like a sucker punch. Victor Blackwood owned the Velvet Room and half the real estate in Cedar Ridge. Smooth-talking city slicker who'd moved in 2 years ago. Always dressed like he was about to step onto a movie set. Appreciate the call, Edith. What are you going to do about it, Walt? Storm over there with your service revolver? That's not your way. She was right. That wasn't my way. 32 years of upholding the law teaches a man patience. Strategy. No need to worry about me, Edith. Never do. Just don't want to see you make a fool of yourself. This town respects you. After hanging up, I walked to our bedroom. Opened Maggie's jewelry box. The turquoise earrings were missing. Had been for weeks. She'd claimed she lost one down the sink. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Maggie's car pulling into the driveway. I tucked the credit card statement into my pocket and moved to the porch, settling into my rocking chair. Watched her step out of her car, 23 years younger than me and looking every bit of it today. Hair freshly done. New blouse I'd never seen before. Evening, Maggie, I called out, keeping my voice steady. How was your sister's? She barely looked my way. Fine. Same as always. I nodded, rocking slowly. That's funny. I called her earlier. She said she hadn't seen you in weeks. Maggie froze halfway up the porch steps. For just a second, I saw panic flash across her face before it hardened into something else. Defiance. You checking up on me now, Walt? I didn't answer. Just kept rocking, watching her squirm under the weight of her own lies. The game had changed. She just didn't know it yet. Maggie stomped past me into the house, slamming the screen door behind her. I stayed in my rocking chair, listening to her banging cabinets in the kitchen. The familiar sounds of her making herself a drink. Ice clinking, bottle opening, liquid pouring. Used to be she'd bring me one too. The next morning, I was at the station before dawn. Deputy Thornton looked up from his paperwork, surprised to see me so early. Everything all right, Sheriff? Need to do some research, Jim? Personal matter. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot that was always brewing. What do we have on Victor Blackwood? Jim's eyebrows shot up. The nightclub owner? Nothing solid. Rumors of gambling in the back rooms. Maybe some girls coming in from out of state. What? Just curious. Man moves in, buys up property, opens that fancy club. Don't you wonder where the money comes from? Jim shrugged. Never gave it much thought. I'm giving it thought now. I settled behind my desk, booted up the ancient computer the county refused to replace. Call your buddy at the Cedar Ridge PD. See if they've got anything. By noon, I had a folder started. Business licenses, property records, tax information, all public record. Nothing illegal about looking. Victor Joseph Blackwood, age 46, originally from Chicago. Moved to Cedar Ridge 2 years ago. No criminal record, at least not under that name. Mayor Collins stopped by while I was deep in research. He leaned against the doorframe, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. Walt, you're coming to the Founders Day barbecue Saturday, right? Folks expect to see their sheriff there. Wouldn't miss it, Bill. I closed the folder casually. 32 years, never missed one yet. Bring Maggie. Haven't seen her around much lately. She's been busy. Bill nodded, giving me an odd look. Everything good with you too? Just fine. I forced a smile. Looking forward to the peach cobbler contest. After Bill left, I locked the Blackwood file in my desk drawer and headed out to my patrol car. Didn't take the usual route through town. Instead, I drove straight to the highway, then took the exit for Cedar Ridge. Parked across from the Velvet Room, which was closed this time of day. Its windows were tinted black, neon signs unlit. But there was activity, deliveries at the back door, staff arriving for prep work. I recognized Maggie's car in the lot. For hours later, when she came home claiming she'd been at her book club, I nodded and asked how the book was. She gave me a detailed review of something she'd never read. I listened, watching her hands move as she talked. No turquoise earrings. That night, I called my old academy buddy Mike Lawson, now with the State Police Financial Crimes Unit. Need information, Mike. Off the record. For you, Walt? Name it. Victor Blackwood. The Velvet Room in Cedar Ridge. Something about it doesn't smell right. Mike's laugh was dry. Funny you should ask. We've had our eye on that place for months. Possible money laundering. Nothing concrete yet. Keep me in the loop? You know I will. He paused. This official business or personal? My grip tightened on the phone. Let's call it professional curiosity. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. Drew a circle in the center with Blackwood's name. Added branches, assets, connections, vulnerabilities. By the time Maggie came downstairs for her late-night tea, I'd already tucked it away and replaced it with a fishing magazine. Going night fishing with Jim on Thursday, I told her, not looking up from an article about bass lures. Maggie paused, kettle in hand. This Thursday. Yep. That's nice. The relief in her voice was audible. Been a while since you've gone. I turned the page. Been a while since I've done a lot of things. Thursday came, and instead of night fishing with Jim, I sat in my truck half a mile from the Velvet Room. Sure enough, at 8:30 p.m., Maggie's car pulled into the lot. She checked her makeup in the rear view before walking inside, straightening her dress, the green one I'd never seen before. I took photos with a telephoto lens. Not for the divorce lawyer, though they'd come in handy there too, but for what would come next. By midnight, I had enough. Watched her leave with Blackwood, his arm around her waist. They went back to his place, a modernized farmhouse on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge. I took more photos, then drove home. When I got there, I moved 3 things. Her favorite coffee mug to a different cupboard, the TV remote to the drawer under the coffee table, and the bathroom scale 2 inches to the left. Small things. Things she'd notice, but couldn't be sure were deliberate. Next morning, I was cooking breakfast when she came downstairs. Watched her open the usual cupboard for her mug, frown, then check another one. Looking for something? I asked, flipping a pancake. My mug. I could have sworn it was here. Found it in with the glasses yesterday. Getting forgetful in your old age. I chuckled, sliding a pancake onto her plate. She stared at me, uncertain. I'm not old, Walt. Figure of speech. You working at the library today? Yes. Till 4. Don't wait dinner on me. Got that community watch meeting tonight. She relaxed visibly. Right. Have fun with that. I spent my morning at the county clerk's office, pulling property records on all Blackwood's holdings. The clerk, Doris Coleman, had worked there since Moses was a boy. She raised an eyebrow at my requests. Personal or professional, Sheriff? Little of both, Doris. Appreciate your discretion. She snorted. Been keeping secrets in this town since before you had your badge, Walt Grayson. The records showed Blackwood had purchased 7 properties in 2 years, including the Velvet Room. All cash transactions. All significantly below market value. Names of previous owners flagged in my memory. Gamblers, drunks, people desperate for quick money. That afternoon, I visited the bank. Had a long talk with Henry Wells, president of Pinecrest Savings and Loan, and my fishing buddy since 3rd grade. Need to make some changes to my accounts, Henry. By the time I left, I'd moved half our savings to a new account under only my name. Left enough in the joint account that Maggie wouldn't notice right away. Also made changes to the ranch property deed that my attorney had advised. That evening, while Maggie thought I was at the community watch meeting, I visited 3 former property owners who'd sold to Blackwood. Each told similar stories: gambling debts at the Velvet Room's back room tables, pressure to sell, threats veiled as business proposals. At home later, I moved more things: her novel from the nightstand to the bookshelf, her slippers from beside the bed to the closet. Rearranged the magnets on the refrigerator. Small things. For the next week, I kept it up. Each day, subtle changes around the house. Her favorite coffee disappeared from the canister, replaced with my preferred brand. The thermostat adjusted 2 degrees cooler than she liked it. Her car keys never where she left them. I watched her grow agitated, confused. Caught her staring at me when she thought I wasn't looking. She started double-checking things, placing items deliberately, then checking later if they'd moved. "You feeling all right, Maggie?" I asked one evening as she searched frantically for her phone charger that I'd moved from the kitchen to the guest room. "I'm fine." Her voice tight. "Just tired. Maybe you're working too hard," I suggested mildly. "Or not sleeping well. Guilty conscience will do that to a person." Her head snapped up. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged, turning back to my crossword puzzle. Just an observation from 30 years in law enforcement. People lose sleep over all sorts of things. The information from Mike Lawson arrived in a plain manila envelope marked personal and confidential. No return address. I opened it at my desk after everyone else had gone home. Inside were financial records, transaction histories, and surveillance reports. Blackwood had shell companies in 3 states. The Velvet Room was just the visible part of the operation. Behind it lay a web of money laundering, illegal gambling, and suspected prostitution. I locked the file in my desk and drove to Edith's modest house on Elm Street. She answered the door in her house slippers, TV blaring in the background. "Sheriff. Bit late for a social call. Need to talk, Edith. About the summer house." She let me in, turning down the volume on a game show rerun. Her living room was cluttered with knickknacks from the dozens of homes she'd cleaned over the years. "Coffee? No thanks." "How often do they use that place?" "Every Thursday, regular as church. Sometimes Tuesdays. Always gone by morning." She studied my face. "You haven't confronted her?" "Not yet." "Smart man. What's your play?" I leaned forward. "Need you to do something for me. Next time they're there, call this number." I handed her a card with Mike Lawson's direct line. "Tell him Sheriff Grayson said it's time." Edith's eyebrows shot up. "You bringing in the state boys?" "Must be more than just your wife's wandering eye." "Much more. But I need to know exactly when they're there next." She nodded slowly. "I clean there Wednesdays and Fridays. Can swing by Thursdays too." Back home, Maggie was already in bed, pretending to sleep. I checked our joint bank account online. She'd withdrawn $5,000 that afternoon. Getting ready to run? Or just securing funds? Either way, it was playing right into my hands. Next morning at the station, I called Bill Collins. "Mayor, remember that conversation we had about improving the town entrance off the highway? Think it's time we moved on that. The old Mason property would be perfect. Walt, we've been over this. Town can't afford to buy that land, and Mason won't sell at a reasonable price. What if I told you Mason might be motivated to sell soon? Very motivated. You know something I don't?" "Always, Bill. Just have the council ready to move when I give the word." Turned out, the Mason property was one of Blackwood's quiet investments. One more piece in place. That afternoon, I visited our family attorney, Harold Jenkins. Had him prepare power of attorney documents, changes, in the framework for divorce proceedings. Paid him in cash. "Walt, 30 years I've been your lawyer. Never seen you like this." "Like what?" "Cold. Calculated." He adjusted his glasses. "Remind me never to cross you." I smiled. "Just protecting what's mine, Harold." The next day was Thursday. I told Maggie I'd be working late, then drove to the station and changed into plain clothes. By 7 p.m., I was parked near the summer house at Lake Conway, watching through binoculars from a hunting blind I'd used for years. Perfect view of the driveway and front door. Maggie arrived first, at 7:30. Blackwood 30 minutes later. Lights came on in the bedroom. I took photos, then called Mike. "They're in place. Everything ready on your end?" "Team standing by. Financial Crimes Task Force is coordinating with local PD. You sure about this, Walt?" "No going back. Been sure since the moment I found out." "What about your wife?" I watched the bedroom window, where 2 shadows moved behind the curtains. "What wife?" "Don't see a wife. Just see a criminal conspiracy." While I waited, I called Edith. "Done what you asked." State boy seemed real interested when I mentioned the safe in the basement. "Safe. Behind the water heater. Seen Blackwood opening it." full of cash and papers. Didn't tell you, 'cause I didn't think it mattered to the cheating part. I thanked her and hung up, smiling for the first time in weeks. The final nail in Blackwood's coffin. At precisely 9 p.m., for unmarked cars and two Cedar Ridge police cruisers converged on the summer house. I stayed in my position, watching through binoculars as officers swarmed the property. Saw Maggie being escorted out in her bathrobe, confusion on her face. Blackwood followed in handcuffs, shirtless and shouting. I started my truck and headed home. Had a lot to prepare before morning. The call came at 2 a.m. I was sitting at the kitchen table, wide awake, when the phone rang. Sheriff Grayson. I kept my voice professional, like this was any other late-night call in 32 years of law enforcement. Walt, it's Mike. Thought you'd want an update. We found the safe. Exactly where your source said it would be. The excitement in his voice was unmistakable. $200,000 in cash. Ledgers detailing payments to local officials. Records of property transactions under market value. Evidence of blackmail. It's a gold mine. What about the charges? Money laundering, racketeering, tax evasion for starters. Looking at federal charges too. Your wife is being processed as a material witness. No charges against her yet, but she's not going anywhere tonight. I took a sip of cold coffee. Let me know when she's being released. I'll be there. You sure that's a good idea? Never been more sure of anything in my life. I hung up and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. Divorce papers already filled out. Documentation of separate finances. Property deeds. All the evidence of Maggie's affair neatly collected and organized. I'd been a meticulous man my entire life. This was no different. By dawn, I was dressed in my best uniform, pinned my badge with extra care. The morning newspaper would already have the story, anonymous tip leads to major crime bust, sheriff not involved due to personal connection. Exactly as planned. I arrived at the Cedar Ridge Police Department just as Maggie was being processed out. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight, mascara smeared, hair disheveled, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. She froze when she saw me standing there. Walt? What are you doing here? Giving you a ride home. Seemed like the proper thing to do. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Did you know about this? The raid. Let's talk in the car. She followed me silently. Once inside my pickup, I handed her a bottle of water. She took it but didn't drink. Victor's been arrested, she said. They're saying he's involved in all sorts of illegal activities. Is that right? They questioned me for hours. Wanted to know if I knew anything about money laundering. Safe full of cash. Properties purchased through coercion. Her voice trembled. Walt, I swear I didn't know. I nodded, starting the engine. I believe you. Relief washed over her face. You do? Sure. I believe you didn't know about his criminal enterprises. But you knew you were sleeping with him. The color drained from her face. Walt? Don't bother denying it. I've known for weeks. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. I pulled onto the highway. Every Thursday night. Sometimes Tuesdays. The lake house. His place in Cedar Ridge. The velvet room after hours. You've been spying on me? Anger replaced her shock. Gathering evidence. There's a difference. I kept my eyes on the road. Victor won't be throwing any grand openings for his new club expansion. Shame, since you bought that nice dress for it. She stared at me. Realization dawning. You set him up. You set all of this up. Victor set himself up by breaking the law. I just made sure he got caught. And me? Was I supposed to get caught too? I glanced at her. You were supposed to be honest with me. 26 years of marriage, Maggie. You owed me that much. When we reached our driveway, I stopped the truck but didn't turn off the engine. Handed her the folder from beside my seat. Divorce papers. Already filled out. My terms are non-negotiable. You get enough to start over somewhere else. I keep the ranch, my pension, everything else. She flipped through the papers, her hands shaking. You can't just erase 26 years. You did that, not me. I want half of everything. I laughed, genuinely amused. You're welcome to try. Your boyfriend is facing 20 years. You've been photographed at a property central to a money laundering operation. Worst case, you're an accomplice. Best case, you're a fool. Either way, you don't have leverage here. You bastard. Tears filled her eyes. You cold, calculating bastard. I'm giving you 48 hours to pack your things and leave. The signed papers will be waiting with Harold Jenkins. Sign them, get your settlement, disappear. Where am I supposed to go? That stopped being my concern when you started sleeping with Victor Blackwood. She got out and slammed the door. I watched her walk to the house, shoulders hunched, folder clutched in her hand. For a moment, I felt a twinge of something, not regret, exactly. Recognition, perhaps, of the death of something once valued. I put the truck in reverse and drove to the station. Had a town to protect, a reputation to maintain, justice to uphold. Just like always. The news spread through Pinecrest like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew about Victor Blackwood's arrest and the raid at the summer house. By evening, they knew about Maggie too. Small towns have a way of turning whispers into shouts. I sat at my desk, reading through reports, when Mayor Collins walked in without knocking. Hell of a thing, Walt. He settled into the chair across from me. Cedar Ridge PD says you gave them the tip that broke the case. Just doing my civic duty, Bill. And Maggie? People are talking. I set down my pen. Let them talk. Truth will come out eventually. Anything I can do? That Mason property. Town should make an offer now. Price just dropped considerably. Bill studied me, understanding dawning on his face. I'll call an emergency council meeting tonight. After he left, Jim Thornton approached cautiously. Sheriff, some of the boys want to buy you a drink at Merle's after shift. Not tonight, Jim. They just want to show support. I looked up at him. Young, earnest. Respected me like a father. Tell them I appreciate it. Maybe tomorrow. When I finally went home, Maggie's car was gone. Inside, the closet stood open, emptied of her clothes. Dresser drawers left askew. Bathroom cleared of her toiletries. She'd taken only what belonged to her, and nothing that didn't. Smart enough to know I'd notice. The divorce papers lay signed on the kitchen table. 2 days later, Harold Jenkins called to confirm the paperwork had been filed. No contest from Maggie. She'd taken the settlement terms exactly as offered. She asked me to tell you she's staying with her sister in Nashville until she figures things out. Anything else? Said to tell you she's sorry. For what it's worth. It's worth exactly what I paid for it. Nothing. That Saturday was the Founders' Day barbecue. Couldn't avoid it without raising more questions. I showed up in my uniform, greeted folks with the same steady handshake and nod I'd given for decades. Some avoided my eyes. Others slapped my back with extra enthusiasm, as if physical contact could communicate their solidarity. Edith Perkins found me by the sweet tea dispenser. You holding up all right? Never better. She snorted. Liar. But I admire your pride. She lowered her voice. Heard from my cousin in Cedar Ridge. They're going through Blackwood's records. Finding dirt on half the county officials over there. You did good, exposing him. Just doing my job. And Maggie? That part of your job too. I poured another cup of tea. Some messes clean themselves up if you're patient enough. The Mason property sale went through the following week. Town got it for 30 cents on the dollar. The criminal forfeiture of Blackwood's assets made it possible. At the press conference announcing the town's plans for the new Welcome Center, Bill Collins called me up to the podium. None of this would have been possible without the diligence and integrity of our sheriff, Walt Grayson. His actions exposed corruption that threatened our entire region. That's the kind of leadership Pinecrest has benefited from for over 30 years. The applause washed over me. I nodded my acknowledgement, not trusting myself to speak. Wasn't about the recognition. Never had been. Later that evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset. Phone rang inside, but I let it go to the machine. Heard Maggie's voice drift through the screen door. Walt, I just wanted to say you were right. About everything. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. The machine clicked off. I kept rocking, watching twilight settle over the ranch that had been in my family for generations. Land that would stay in the Grayson name. A reputation preserved. Justice served. The cost had been high. But as my daddy always said, some things are worth whatever price you have to pay. 1 year later, I leaned against my truck at the Cedar Ridge courthouse, watching Victor Blackwood being led out in handcuffs after his sentencing. 25 years without parole. He'd aged a decade in custody, designer suits replaced by prison orange, swagger reduced to a defeated shuffle. He spotted me and stopped cold. You set me up, Grayson. Ruined everything. I tipped my hat. You did that all by yourself, Victor? I just made sure you paid for it. His face contorted with rage as the marshals pushed him toward the prisoner transport. How's retirement treating you, Sheriff? Mike Lawson approached, offering his hand. Ex-sheriff now. And just fine. I shook his hand firmly. Town's in good hands with Jim Thornton. He had a good teacher. My phone buzzed. Text from Sarah, my daughter. Flight landed. Waiting for luggage. Hadn't seen Sarah in 8 years, not since her mother, and I had our falling out. But Maggie's betrayal had opened old wounds, got us talking again. Sometimes it takes one break to fix another. I said goodbye to Mike and drove to the airport. Sarah was waiting outside arrivals, looking so much like her mother had 30 years ago it almost hurt. But her smile was mine. Dad. She hugged me hard. Place still standing without you keeping the peace? More or less. Criminals have less to worry about these days. She laughed. I doubt that. As we drove back to the ranch, she filled me in on her life in Seattle. Law degree. Prosecutor's office. Following in my footsteps her own way. Heard about Mom, she said finally. Moving to California with some insurance salesman? So I'm told. Living off my settlement. You could have taken everything. Took what mattered. Left the rest. At the ranch, I showed her the improvements. New roof. Fresh paint. Garden expanded. Life moving forward. Later, sitting on the porch with beers, she asked the question I'd been waiting for. Do you regret how you handled it? The whole Blackwood situation? I considered it, watching the sun set over land that had been in my family for generations. Land that would go to Sarah someday. Not one bit. Man breaks the law, he pays the price. Man breaks a vow, same principle. Cold but fair. That's always been your way. Only way I know. She clinked her bottle against mine. To justice served. I nodded. Cold as ice.